Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. It is Monday, March 13th, and I'm your host, Cara Santa Maria. This week, we're going to be chatting with a Venom scientist and a great science writer named Dr. Christie Wilcox. But before we get to that, I want to thank those of you who made Talk Nerdy possible this week. Now, remember, Talk Nerdy is and will always be 100% free to download. And the only way I can afford to do that, since I do Talk Nerdy all by my lonesome, is through support from listeners like yourselves. So if you're interested in supporting the show, go on over to patreon.com/talknerdy and pledge your support. The big pledges this week come from Phil T. Bear and Timothy Glover, along with Mark Hepburn, Pedro M. Rosario Barbosa, Christian Jeffrey, David Lacer, Jeffrey Perez, Stuart Ogue, The Honorable Husband, Charles Payette, Jafe, Gabriel Felipe Jaramillo Gonzalez, Brian Holden, and last but certainly not least, Jeffrey Sewell. Thank you all from the bottom of my heart. You make Talk Nerdy possible. All right, guys. This week, I'm super thrilled to invite to the show Dr. Christie Wilcox. She has a PhD in cell and molecular biology. She specialized in ecology, evolution, and conservation biology. And she had a specific focus during her research, and it's continued throughout her science writing career in venomous animals. So she has a new book called Venomous. You can find it now on Amazon or your local bookstore, wherever books are sold. And we're going to dive right into that now. So without any further ado, here she is, Christie Wilcox. Well, Christie, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure.
I am excited that we are chatting. We are doing it remotely via Skype, but I haven't seen you, oh my God, in so long. And the reason we're doing it remotely is because we don't live in the same city, but you're a lot closer than you were before.
Yes, I just moved back to the mainland from Hawaii, so I am 3,000 or so miles closer to you.
Wow. Is it an exciting move? Is it mixed emotions? Do you already miss Hawaii? Tell me everything.
Well, it's definitely exciting. I do miss Hawaii. You know, it's 40 something degrees out here, so I'd prefer to have the nice 70, 80s that we'd be having right now in Honolulu, but it's an exciting move. We're moving to be closer to family because we're expecting a little one on the way in June.
Oh my God, shut up. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, we're really excited. So we wanted to have the
Oh.
soon-to-be grandparents a little bit closer.
Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, I'm so excited for you. What great news. And a wonderful reason. If you had to leave Hawaii, a wonderful reason to do so. But you've got to come visit Los Angeles because it's like 80 degrees outside here today.
I was about to say maybe I need to come down is really what needs to
Yeah.
happen. I need to drive south a little bit to get the temperature up.
Exactly. Well, and it's interesting. I don't want to dive right into your work, but your recent book, Venomous, is all about venom, right?
Mm.
And the animals that make it and how you can use it and all the good stuff around that. And venomous animals tend to thrive in warmer environments, don't they?
You do tend to have a lot of them. It's interesting. I'm not entirely sure there's a solid explanation for why that is, but certainly a lot of the species that tend to be venomous, like insects and reptiles, do well in very, very challengingly warm climates.
Yeah. And so you may be seeing less of them now that you are in a colder climate, but that is probably a good thing for the little one. So yeah, we'll get into Venom, but I am really excited to reconnect with you. I think is the last time that I saw you a few years ago at the Science Online conference.
I think it might be. I don't think
Wow.
yeah, it's got to have been, what, 3 or 4 years now. Jeez.
Yeah, that's a long time. But we have managed to stay in touch somewhat via social media. You are a social media guru. I definitely enjoy all of your posts. I enjoy all of your writing. For people who don't know, obviously they'll get it throughout the podcast episode, but you are a phenomenal science writer. And not only do you have actually a book that you wrote and a book that you edited, or co-edited, I should say. But you also keep a blog called Science Sushi for now your blog is at Discover, isn't it?
Yep, Discover
Yeah.
magazine.
Very cool. Yeah, it used to be at Scientific American, so you can find older blog posts there, but now it's at Discover Magazine. And you also focus a lot on science communication and using social media to help get science across. I'm glad that you do that because although I think it's a growing movement and a lot of younger scientists and younger science communicators really get it, there's definitely still an old guard there, isn't there?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Although it's been really, really refreshing for me as someone who has been trying to get scientists on social media and to use social media for outreach and for those broader impacts that they're supposed to be doing for their grants. Over the past, I'd say 5 or 6 years, I mean, first time I'd go out there, I'd be like, "Hey guys, there's this thing called Twitter," and the room would be silent, and everyone would be looking at me like I was crazy. And then gradually over time, I'm like, "Hey guys, there's this thing called Twitter." And they're like, "Yeah, yeah, we know. How do I use it better?" So it's been really, really great to see that change where from before where it was sort of all unknowns and nobody really felt like they could jump in to now where it's everyone's sort of involved. They're just trying to figure out how to do it well.
Absolutely. And this is coming from someone who works as a science communicator basically full time, but like some, not all science communicators, you came up through the ranks of traditional science and academia. You have a PhD
Mhm.
um, in what is your field? Was it ecology?
So my PhD is technically in cell and molecular biology with a specialization in conservation, ecology, and evolution.
Gotcha. Okay. So those kind of focuses, ecology, conservation, evolution, were in the cell and molecular department at
Y-
the university where you went.
yeah, yeah. I was sort of a bit of a branch out from the traditional CMB student at UH because
Mhm.
a lot of them tend to be biomedically based, and so
Gotcha.
uh, everyone always was excited for the seminars I'd give in our little department because they got to hear something that wasn't T cells and antigens and
Which, of course, obviously, if you're studying nature and you're studying, kind of the organization of different species in a place like Hawaii, that is going to be exciting. We think of Hawaii as this like tropical paradise, but there's a lot of really cool ecology there.
yeah, I mean, Hawaii is a really, really special place. I mean, not just because it's gorgeous and it's paradise, but also in terms of its isolation. So you have a lot of evolution going on, a lot of species and speciations. You have a lot of adaptive radiations. So a lot of really interesting stuff going on and above and below the water in Hawaii.
Mm-mm. Oh yeah, yeah, of course. There's like this whole marine ecosystem too that surrounds you. What was your specific research focus when you were working on your PhD?
So I was studying lionfishes, which is one of the venomous groups of fishes, and I was looking at the evolution just within the group. So looking at sort of phylogeography, understanding how the different species came to be, and understanding population connections between different groups in different areas, but also looking at venom evolution. So I was trying to understand how they became venomous and how their venom may have changed as they speciated.
Very cool. So you've been interested in venom for quite a long time. Are lionfishes those crazy bright ones with all of the quill-looking fins?
So yeah, they are very flamboyant fishes as fishes go. They tend to be sort of red and white striped, red, white, and black stripes. And some of the bigger ones, I mean, they can grow to be more than a foot long and have
Oh
these
God.
frilly striped fins that just really, really impressive looking.
And so they themselves are venomous. Is how do they get the venom into their I assume their prey or maybe their predators? Do they bite?
So they actually only have a defensive venom. So they don't use the
Okay.
venom for capturing prey. They're ambushy predators. They also go hunting. They're very weird looking. So particularly they've become invasive in the Atlantic, and particularly there, a lot of the fish don't recognize them as a fish, pretty much
Oh
because they're
yeah.
so weird looking. So they can kind of walk right up and eat whatever they want, which is a bit of a problem. But the
Yeah, I'm
venom
sure.
is defensive venom, so they have it in their spines. They have spines in their back, on their anal fins, and those basically you have to stab yourself on the spine. So it's
Ah,
predator's fault if they get stung by a lionfish.
AKA the researcher's fault.
Yes. Now I'm very proud to say that I did not once get stung by any of my animals that I was working with.
Oh, that's probably not something everybody who
No.
works with these animals can say. How dangerous is their venom to humans?
Lionfish venom is not terribly dangerous in a lethal sense of the word.
Mhm.
You would have to work really hard to kill yourself with lionfish venom. You'd probably have to like stick a bunch of them into you all over you at once. Um,
Gotcha, gotcha.
but it really, 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 really hurts, and it hurts wild. And so I mean, I've seen people get stung, and I've seen the aftermath of it, and we're talking, the burliest, toughest men that you can imagine, just in tears, broken down, crying
Oh,
because of the pain.
no. Yeah, I've heard that about black and brown widows that, if they bite you, they won't kill you, but you'll wish you were dead because it's, like, that painful.
Yeah, and there's some remarkable medical literature. I mean, way back, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, a lot of the medical literature was, how does this work? Let's inject it into my arm and see what happens. So there's some
Oh,
really
god.
incredible literature of people just describing being stung by these. And one of the ones that always gets me was a guy who was stung himself on a lionfish and said that the pain was just short of maddening.
Oh, no. Oh, man. I can't even imagine, and luckily you can't really imagine either. I thought that it would be interesting before we even dive too deeply to take a second because obviously there's a very common not even misnomer, but like misunderstanding about the difference between venom and poison and kind of just maybe we can do like a general overview of animal toxins, natural toxins, and how they work and how we categorize them.
Sure. Yeah. So a toxin is sort of the generic category. That means any substance that is harmful in a very small dose. And small is somewhat of a relative term, but what we're looking at is something that you would ingest or that would be delivered into you. So you
Mhm.
think of something like water, and yeah, technically speaking, you can drink enough water to kill yourself. If you drink enough water, it'll throw off the osmotic balance in your body so that your blood is too watery, essentially. And
Mhm.
all your cells will swell up because they'll soak in this water, and then you'd have really, really nasty problems. But it takes like gallons and gallons of gallons within a minute for
Yeah.
water to be toxic. So we don't consider water a toxin. So we're talking about things that in much smaller doses and something you're likely to be exposed to would cause physiological harm. And
Gotcha.
so under toxins as the umbrella category, you have sort of the subcategories, and that's where venoms versus poisons comes in.
Mm.
So poisons are anything that is toxic by ingestion, inhalation, or absorption. And so,
Ingestion, inhalation, absorption. So by eating it or drinking it, by breathing it in, or by getting it somehow on or in your skin.
yeah, so that on your skin, especially, like, so topical, if you rubbing against something,
Mhm.
um, yeah, drinking and eating or breathing it in. Usually, people especially think of it in terms of things that you drink or eat or that touch you.
Yeah,
So,
like arsenic poisoning, for
right,
example.
right, like arsenic, any of those sorts of poisons.
Mhm.
Something like a poison dart frog, right? It's not going to do anything to you unless you touch it. And
Gotcha.
then you're going to potentially get those toxins into your body. Venoms, and the reason I focused on them in this book, are in my mind a little bit cooler because they are any toxin that is introduced through wounding. And
Mm.
so the animal
Wounding, I love that word.
wounding, yeah, I know, right? So the animal has to somehow harm you directly and cause a break in that, outer barrier of your skin or
Hmm.
your sort of protective barrier of your body and get that toxin into you.
Ooh, nice. So that would be things like puncture wounds
Mm.
or stabbing with quills or with spines. What about uh, like a jellyfish, right? Because they burn you. Is that a good way to put it? Like a burn?
So what jellies actually do is thousands and thousands of micropunctures. So what they have is like a little teeny tiny organelle that shoots out a tube like harpoon. So it's essentially like a
Ooh.
tiny, teeny microscopic hypodermic needle. And
Oh my
then
gosh.
that capsule contains just the tiniest amount of venom. And so if you look at a jelly sting up close under a microscope, what you actually see are tons of little teeny, teeny, tiny holes.
Oh,
Little
wow.
teeny
So
tiny.
even
So
though, yeah, we think of it as a burn because it's like an abrasion, but an abrasion really is a bunch of little broken
right.
chunks of skin.
Right. And in
Ugh.
this case, they've designed this or have this perfect little weapons that shoot out, and they're fascinating because they're called nighty. These cells that shoot them out, they shoot out at the speed of a bullet. So we're talking about
Whoa.
one of the fastest biological actions that man has ever discovered is the triggering of that cell to fire and then that unwrapping of the tubule and drilling it. They sort of go out in a sort of corkscrew kind of way. So it
Mm.
drills it into the flesh of whatever the jelly is stinging.
Oh my gosh, they're pure evil. I said jellyfish, which I'm sure in your head was like, "Ow." Sorry,
Oh,
jelly,
no.
sea jelly. I actually once when I was living in Texas, went on a family vacation to Port Aransas, which is a little island, down in the South. You know, a lot of people go to Galveston and places like that or South Padre. And we were swimming in the water, which is super gross. I don't recommend it because the Gulf of Mexico is like, I call it chocolate milk water. It's like not the cleanest. And I got stung actually down there by a man of war, like a
Mhm.
purpley green bag-like jelly with these long, pretty curly tentacles. I saw it in the water um nearby and it was really beautiful, but it was so painful. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So painful.
Yeah, men of
Ve
wars are not one to mess with.
Hopefully I think it was probably a baby or something because, I mean, it was my entire arm. I was a kid. It kind of, like, ran the length of my arm. The I keep calling it a sting. What would be, like, the medical classification? Do they generally call them
Yeah,
stings?
but for
Yeah,
jellies, you
okay.
generally say a
Yeah.
jellyfish sting or a jelly.
Yeah. Um, a and yeah, so that happened and it sucked. It really hurt.
Yeah, yeah, jellies. A lot of jellies really hurt, but what people don't really realize is that some of them can be very lethal, and they kill more people every year than sharks do.
Really? And it's that the venom itself has like, deleterious effects to your biology?
Absolutely. So particularly the box jellies are the ones that you watch out for when it comes to lethal stings. But there's basically two sort of pathways that they can kill you because one would be too easy, right? You have these really big box jellies like Chironex fleckeri, which is down in Australia and some places in the Pacific. And it's got these 60 tentacles that can be super, super long. The actual bell can be the size of a basketball. So you're talking about this
Wow.
huge animal. And when it wraps around and injects its venom, it can cause complete cardiovascular collapse within 5 minutes.
Oh, wow. And so what actually happens? Does it slow the heart?
So, what actually happens depends on the amount of venom, but one of the things that's really potentially lethal is that it has this small pore forming toxin, which we call a porin, which
Mhm.
basically just shoots through red blood cells like buckshot. So, you
Oh,
get all of these
no.
holes in your red blood cells and they release potassium. And so, you have this sudden spike of potassium in the blood which is called hyperkalemia in medical sense of the word, and it can
Mhm.
cause the heart. It basically messes with the heart's ability to beat.
Yeah, because that electrical activity really depends on those ions, right? Going kind of across the membrane there.
Exactly, exactly. So then you can have the heart basically stopped in a couple of minutes. Even a full-grown adult person can die within minutes.
Ugh. Oh
Uh,
my gosh, how scary. Is the box jelly the one that's on the cover of your book?
Yes, that is
Yeah.
Chironex. That's the bad boy. Um,
Ugh.
yeah, so there's that, and then there's the really small box jellies, which seem like they'd be much less of a problem. But there's actually ones that are just barely bigger than a matchstick. I mean, tentacles and all.
Oh
And
no.
they sting you. You don't even really feel it necessarily. A lot of people don't even know they've been stung. But then 4 to 48 hours later, they've set off this cascade within your body that leads to sudden spikes and drops in blood pressure and this feeling of impending doom, which just seems very fitting. And it can lead to such intense spikes in blood pressure that you actually have cerebral hemorrhaging. So you have blood leaking into the brain, causing death.
Wow. And they're like so tiny you don't see them.
And
Okay,
they
I'm
can be
like totally
really
freaked
tiny.
out now. Where do these things live?
So box jellies live around the world, but largely in the tropics and more troublingly in the Indo-Pacific. So if you're in the Pacific Ocean and in the tropics, that's more higher risk area for
Okay.
box jellies. But they
Oh
can be found
man.
around. I mean, there's box jellies off of Florida. There's box jellies, and so they can be found in all around the world.
The ocean's a rough place.
It really is. It really, really is.
It's so crazy to think about. And jellies are just fascinating for like many, many reasons. The fact that they're venomous is only one of them, but they're such interesting, like deceptively simple organisms, or I should say, aren't they colonial organisms? Didn't they evolve as like lots of things that just sort of grew to live together?
So it depends on the species. Like the
Gotcha.
Portuguese man o' war you were talking about is a colony. So
Mm-hmm.
the individuals that are making up that float you were talking about, the really pretty bubble at the top, are different than the ones that are making up the tentacles, and those are different than the ones that are actually doing the reproductive function.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, but they're a colony of organisms, whereas you have the big box jellies is one organism.
Gotcha. Oh, okay.
So
Interesting. Yeah, it's funny. They're probably, you know, so different, even evolutionarily speaking. It's so many different species, but we just think of them all as the same thing. We're like, oh yeah, it's just jellies.
there are tons of different species of jellies, and jellies that they are relatives of corals and anemones. So you're talking once you
Mm-hmm.
talk about all of cnidarians, you're talking about a ton of species, all of which are venomous.
That's fascinating. I remember for a shoot once going on a fishing boat. We were in Alaska and it was a big salmon fishing boat, and they were kind of teaching me how they do it with these big net pins. And there was a little boat that follows behind the big boat, and it runs a line out to make a big, basically pin, or I should say pen of nets, and then they pull all of the nets in, and the hope is that they're also full of salmon. And there are these deckhands, these guys that are super strong, and their job is to just keep the lines clean. So they stand on the back of the boat and they sort of control all of the big heavy ropes and make sure they don't kink, because they could, kill you if they do. And while they're doing this and the net is being raised up over their head, there's like thousands of jellies that get caught up in the nets, and they were just pouring down on these guys' heads. And I remember asking them like, are you in pain right now? And they were like, oh yeah, it stings. You just kind of get used to it. And I was like, that's the craziest thing I've ever seen. But I guess this is a common occurrence for fishermen because there's so many jellies in most fishermen's nets.
Yeah, I mean that they have this. Their bodies are sort of, and the way they swim around. I mean, it's kind of prone to getting caught in things, and you have all these tentacles, and so getting wrapped up in
Mhm.
nets is pretty common. It's actually a really big problem in places like the Philippines and Thailand, because some of the local communities that they'll have fishermen that go out and they're fishing, and when they pull in their nets, they'll pull in these big dangerous box jellies, and they'll get badly stung, and there's sort of a community attitude that if you die that way, that's your time to die. And so there's
Wow.
this an effort, particularly by researcher that I've been working with as a postdoc, Angel Yanagihara, to try to help those people and be like, no, wait, you don't have to die. We can do something, I promise.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so crazy.
Hmm.
That is so crazy. I started to look up, because I was like, maybe that wasn't a man of war. I always remembered it being a man of war, and then I just looked at the welcome page for the city of Port Aransas, and like, oh yes, apparently Portuguese man of war are a big problem down there. And I'm looking at a picture, and of course it was a man of war that stung me. And I'm looking at the treatment protocols. I don't remember doing this. Maybe I did. I do remember packing it with wet sand and then washing it, as this also calls you to do, because apparently that helps get the remnants of the toxin, or actually the pieces of the jellyfish, off of your skin. But then it says to make a paste from unseasoned meat tenderizer.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've been working on now as a postdoc is actually the fact that many many lay articles and sort of easily access information on what to do in a jellyfish sting is just wrong.
And this is so scary because this is the welcome page for the city of Port Aransas, Texas.
Yeah,
It's like cityofportaransas.org beach safety. Like, you would think that they would have some sort of scientific consultant.
you would think, but yeah, there's even we've
Wow.
been dealing with things like even the big name sites like WebMD or things having
Mhm.
all of these inaccurate things. Part of it is that there has been somewhat limited research on what to do in the case of a jelly sting.
Mhm.
I mean, often these are non-lethal sort of stings, and so it's been a lower priority than, what do you do in the case of a snake bite, right? Because,
Yeah.
one of them is definitely life-threatening, whereas one of them is
Mhm.
is probably not. But the other thing is just that people have gotten all of these crazy ideas, and no one's ever actually tested them in a lab.
I know, you hear people saying that you should pee on it.
Don't pee on it. Please don't pee on it.
Yeah,
So
I
I
didn't
actually
pee
have
on
tested
mine.
I have tested peeing on so what I do or have been doing a lot of in the past couple of years with Angel Yanagihara is testing. Just
Oh,
taking
cool.
these out and testing them. And so we developed
Mhm.
this sting model, which is essentially like a blood jello, which is red blood cells suspended in this substance called agarose, and then we have a skin which is made from pig intestine.
Oh my god, this is
And
so
so
gross, I love it.
I know, right? And so it looks kind of roughly speaking like a person's flesh, right?
Uh-huh.
And we can lay tentacles on it and they will sting it.
Oh,
And
how
then
funny.
the venom goes into that blood cell packed jello, and it starts to lyse those red blood cells, like, and kill the red blood cells, which is what I told you, what happens
Mhm.
when they sting you potentially. And so we can measure the amount of venom and the activity of the venom based on how many of those red blood cells essentially die. Because when they
Gotcha.
die, they become clear instead of little red packets. And so the
Mhm.
agarose becomes clear. So you see like a clear zone where the tentacle was laid. And so we've been testing these things, and I've tested my own urine because that's where you get urine if you're a scientific researcher.
Of course.
And I would not have me pee on you if you get stung by a jelly because it makes things way worse.
Oh, no. Yeah, I definitely remember when it happened, people in my family being like, "I think you're supposed to pee on it." And I was like, "I'm not doing that." And then we Googled it, and one of the first things it said was pack it with wet sand. And I did that just because it really, like, I don't know if it had any beneficial effect to cleaning the venom out, but it definitely felt good. You know what I mean? And it hurt so bad, and I just needed something to
Right.
carry me until we could get to the pharmacy. Luckily, a lot of pharmacies in beach communities actually carry drugs. They
Mhm.
carry, like, jelly sting, topicals, which are probably just cortisone or something, but they can really help.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing that you want to think about is it's weird. People talk about putting wet sand on it or scraping tentacles, but what actually happens is there's tons of those stinging cells on your skin, even if the
Mhm.
tentacle's gone, but especially if it's there, that haven't
Yeah.
gone off. So when they actually sting you, less than 1% of those stinging cells fire. And so you have the potential to make your sting a lot worse. And so
Interesting.
what you want to do is get that tentacle off so as quickly and as calmly as possible, so to speak, without causing more stinging. And
Yeah.
pressure is one of the easiest ways to cause more stinging. And so
Huh.
if you put wet sand on it, if you scrape it off, you're causing those stinging cells to actually fire and you're getting your sting worse. Even
So the
though
best thing to do is just wash it?
so the best thing to do is either to pull it off if you've got like tweezers or gloves, like to just pull them off, or even better if you have vinegar. Um, Vinegar has this awesome property where it actually basically fixes those cells, and so they cannot fire. And I've tested it in
Hmm.
all sorts of different species: Portuguese man o' war, box jellies, and vinegar is basically the best sort of common solution. Angels developed a solution that's even better if you can get access to it, called Sting No More, which can contain vinegar. The spray
Hmm.
contains vinegar, but it also contains some other stuff and a venom inhibitor, which is,
Oh, that's great.
yeah, that's what helps. That she has that
Yeah.
compound in there that really stops those pore forming molecules, those porins, from doing their job. And so that stuff's amazing. And I can say firsthand how amazing it is because I managed to get myself stung by a Portuguese man o' war while collecting them in Florida.
Ha! So you know you're with me. We're
I
on the same
do.
team.
They hurt way more than they should, especially because I barely
I
got
know.
stung and I was just in like terrible pain. And I was trying to be all tough because I was actually on the University of Miami's shark research vessel. They were kind enough to take me out to the Gulf Stream so I could try to find these guys because they weren't blowing on shore at the time when I needed them.
Uh,
And so I'm sitting there with a bunch of other guys who are doing, their stuff and their research, and I'm just get stung and I'm trying to tough it out and I'm like, I'm fine, I'm fine. I'm like, I'm not fine. And I like crack open the Sting No More and spray my hand and then put the cream on because I'm just
yeah, you
dying.
can't. It's so painful. And I guess I remember when I got stung, I don't remember noticing any like of their tissue left on my arm. Perhaps it was there, probably was there, but because I got stung in the water and
Hmm.
then kind of got out of the water as soon as I felt it.
Right,
It mostly just looked like a big rash on my arm. I didn't see any of the actual tentacle remnants on my arm,
right.
but I'm sure they were there. I'm sure I still needed to do more washing.
Well, and especially because what can happen is that these stinging cells just sort of fall off the tentacle. They kind of shed them off the
Mm,
tentacle, and they're microscopic. You're not going to see them
yeah.
on you, especially the undischarged ones. I mean, you're not going to know until you do something. One of the things that we do, or when I was in Hawaii, is collecting the box jellies that come in every month into Waikiki, and
Mhm.
we collect their tentacles, and then Angel uses that to make venom for other studies.
Yeah.
But you have this at some point, this slurry of 90 these stinging cells in this substance that keeps them from firing. And if you're not careful, you can splash that on yourself, and you have no idea until you go home and hop in the shower, and the fresh water hits
Uh,
them, and then they start to sting, and all of a sudden you have this like burning patch, and you're like, "Oh, I must
oh
have
no.
oh, darn it!" And it really hurts.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you experience, I guess this also venom when, or no, do venom only comes from animals, doesn't it? This would be
It
when you get stung by, not stung, but, what am I thinking of? Poison ivy, is that actual poison?
So poison ivy would be a poison, but a stinging nettle,
A
like
stinging
that,
nettle
could
would
be
be
a
venom.
venom. Yeah.
Gotcha, gotcha. But it's a similar situation where, if you get stung, you would need to clean it and make sure that you get it all off of you because it can continue to hurt you, like, as it spreads
Right,
if you don't
right.
wash your hands or wash the affected area. Ah, oh my god, it's so I mean, I don't wanna say it's so scary because it's like, there's a million things out there that can kill you every day, like, we can't obsess over them, but it's fascinating that nature has evolved these like, pretty insanely toxic chemicals that can kill a full-grown man, you know? Um, Both on the venom side and on the, I guess I should say, poison side.
Hmm.
Is is the is the reason venom is so much more interesting to you because of that trauma that has to be induced?
I really find it fascinating to look at and not just the toxins themselves, but also, yeah, those basically you have armed animals. They have to have some sort of
Mhm.
weapon. They are stabbing or poking or stinging or something. And so I find it really fascinating to look at both pieces there. Not just the fact that they have these toxins, but the fact that they found a way to inject you with them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like yeah, so it's like a chemical defense and also a mechanical defense, and they work in tandem
Mhm.
to be really effective. Are most venoms defensive mechanisms, or are some venoms also, predatory mechanisms?
Well, there are certainly predatory venoms. I'm trying to think if I could guess. I'm not sure what percent. It's probably about 50-50.
Mhm.
But I mean, you have like the fish. Venomous fish are almost all defensive venoms, and you have, a lot of bees, for example. Bees tend to be defensive. But then you have something like wasps, and a lot of the wasps, like a parasitoid wasp, will use venom to incapacitate and then alter the brain of their prey that they're going to feed to their future baby wasps.
Ooh, how do they alter the brain?
So, I mean, it depends on the species, but basically, they have a venom that selectively dampens certain types of signals going to the brain.
Mhm.
So, when they can inject it, usually directly into the brain, they can basically they turn other animals into zombies.
Ooh.
My favorite example of this is the emerald cockroach wasp because it's been really well studied and it's really well understood. And so you have this little tiny wasps that'll take on a cockroach, which can be 4 to 20 times her size, and she'll come in and do a quick sting in the chest, basically the thorax, right in between the first pair of legs, and that will temporarily paralyze the cockroach. And that
Mhm.
allows her to go for the second sting, which is a much more precise sting where she stabs her stinger into its head, feels around in its insect brain, what we call ganglia, and finds this particular part of the brain, these particularly two regions where she wants to inject venom. And what they end up, the compounds she injects basically make it harder for motor signals and other signals to turn on those parts of the brain. And the end effect of this is that you have a cockroach that isn't afraid. So things that normally make cockroaches run, like rubbing the legs or brushing against the legs or things like that, this cockroach won't run. It'll just sort of
Wow.
sit there. And so she can then, once the paralysis wears off, she can lead it by its antenna into a burrow, attach a little egg to it, that will grow into be a larva, and then that little larva will eat its way through the cockroach, eating the cockroach to grow and to gain all the nutrients it needs. And then when it's finally finished, the cockroach gets to die. Finally gets to die, and the
Oh my
wasp will pupate and
gosh.
become a wasp.
I would say I feel bad for the cockroach, but I don't really because cockroach.
Is cockroach.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's
That's fascinating, and the crazy thing is this is, like, probably such an evolutionary drive, they completely don't know that they're doing it, right? Like, this is
mhm.
something that is totally, an instinctual thing that is helping to maintain and preserve the species.
Yep. And
Ugh.
it's amazing. I mean, the number of there's hundreds of thousands of these wasps that are parasitoid wasps, and they each have their own sort of subset of other animals that they prey upon during this moment to feed their babies. And some of them, and some of them stick babies in caterpillars, and then the caterpillars will actually defend the pupating wasps like they're some part of them. So they'll attack anything that comes near. And so there's something in the venom is causing them to become these sort of zombie bodyguards.
Yes. Oh, mind control, I love
Yeah.
it.
And then
It's so
there's just a ton
cool.
of them. There's all sorts of different kinds.
Ah. And then, of course, there's obvious, like, things like snake venom. We think of snake venom, probably when you say venom, that's the first thing most people think of. I
Mhm.
like that you have, box jelly on the cover of your book because obviously those are venomous too, but I do think that the general public thinks of a snake bite when they think of venom, and snake venom really can run the gamut from like not too dangerous but really painful to like pretty quick death.
Yeah, snake venoms are very, very different depending on a lot of different factors. Part of it is you just have so many different snakes and these different lineages of snakes that have had time to evolve different toxins.
Mhm.
Uh, but yeah, there's a lot of snake venoms that are, very pain free, but they are really paralytic, and those are the ones that are really dangerous. Things like cobras, um, because you can get bitten and then slowly your muscles paralyze until you can't breathe.
Yeah, yeah. And they go through all these horrible, like, fasciculatory kind of intermediary steps too. There's a
Hmm.
lot of great videos you can look up online of what snake venom does to the body, and
Right.
they're great patient videos of people their muscles are just shaking violently. And
Right.
the cool thing is that in order to make anti-venom, you have to first capture that venom, right? And like
Hmm.
inject it into an animal.
Yeah. So, I mean, we make antivenom essentially at the moment the same way it's been made for 100 years, which is you take venom, you inject it into an animal with an adaptive immune system like us, so something like a horse, and then you let that immune system do its job, which is to create antibodies to fight against things that aren't supposed to be there, like venoms. And so then you take the blood from that animal and separate out those antibodies that target the snake toxins, or hopefully separate out
Mhm.
the ones that target the snake toxins. And then you inject those into a person to boost their immune system and to bind up some of that toxin when they get bitten by a snake.
Yeah.
Now, newer technologies are better at that sort of latter part of it, of separating out the snake toxin fighting antibodies. Before, it was the very first antivenom was essentially a guy injected ducks with cobra venom, I think it was, and
Mhm.
then took duck blood and injected it into people. So I
Oh,
mean,
yeah, because 'cause I'm sure there's nothing dangerous about injecting duck blood into your
yeah,
face.
I mean, and that's actually honestly one of the biggest problems with antivenoms, other than um, the sort of long drawn out costly process of producing them, is that there
Mhm.
is always some danger of injecting something that is made in an animal into a person.
Sure,
And so
yeah,
there are a lot of adverse reactions where people have allergic reactions or other things to, some of the other proteins that get in there in it.
so it really is just like a risk-benefit thing, like, I'd rather not die of this snake bite, so I'll deal with this, like, rejection experience that I'm having.
Yeah, and I mean, we've, as medical science that is, has figured out kind of how to deal with allergic reactions. We've got a pretty good protocol in place, so to speak, so to handle when someone has an allergic reaction. So it's worth it to risk the allergic reaction in many cases to get these antitoxins in there.
Mhm. Yeah, and the really cool thing that I've been noticing in reading more and more about venom, and of course, I'm, a layperson when it comes to this, but I've been seeing story after story about how venom has so many compounds depending on the animal, depending on the type of venom and the strength and the severity. There's so many interesting toxic compounds contained in them, and many of those toxic compounds actually have really amazing medicinal properties.
Yeah, so most venoms, I mean, you're not talking about a single toxin. You might be talking about a single lethal toxin,
Mhm.
maybe, but even then, you have all of these different molecules that are working together to produce whatever effect the venom's trying to have.
Mhm.
And what's weird to think about, but makes sense when you really wrap your mind around it, is that the things that venoms do that are bad, we want our drugs to do, but just in moderation. So you have
Yeah, like in
something
a controlled way.
right. So you have something like a pit viper, right? And these guys are notorious for causing steep drops in blood pressure. And it works really
Okay.
well for them because they bite onto a little mammal. The mammal's blood pressure drops, and then they pass out and then they can catch it. Right.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's the basic gist of that right there. You've got your meal. So they bite us, our blood pressure drops too in a dangerous way, and we have to deal with it. But if you can take that blood pressure dropping compound and you could isolate it and then give it to people who have high blood pressure in the perfect dose, right? Then you'd be
Yeah.
able to help people with hypertension. You'd be able to reduce people's blood pressure in a controlled and happy way. And in fact, that was the first venom-derived drug to hit the market was we call it captopril, but it is a toxin from a Brazilian pit viper that drops blood pressure. And so captopril has been a game changer for treating high blood pressure, and it's $1 billion drug.
Wow. That's so cool. And that's just one example of potentially like thousands.
Yeah, I mean, and there's just endless, endless examples. I mean, we now have at least six venom-derived pharmaceuticals on the market. There's a couple that are anticoagulants, so they stop
Mhm.
blood from clotting, which you really need to have if you're trying to do surgery, for example, and you're trying to get into a person and move things around. You can't have their blood sit there and clotting everywhere around you and you know, basically blocking everything that you're trying to do. You need them
Yeah.
the blood flowing. So some of these are really, really useful in things like surgery.
And of
Uh,
course, for people who deal with blood clots, who deal with embolisms and things like that, to be able to have options for blood thinners is great. But at the same time, a snake wants to thin your blood so that you'll like bleed to death, and you don't want that to happen to you. So it's
right,
really about that balance, huh?
right. And actually, a lot of the blood thinners and these anticoagulants, what they come from is leeches.
Oh,
Because
cool.
leeches, what they want to do is they bite you, right? They put in a painkiller so that you don't notice that they're there, and then they need that blood to keep flowing. If your blood were to clot up and close up that hole, then that completely defeats the purpose. So they put in anticoagulants so that they can just feed until they're done, and then they can fall off. And in that sense, you end up with all these anticoagulants.
And is that considered a venom?
Yep.
Ah, leeches are venomous. I never thought about them that way.
Yeah. So leeches, mosquitoes, depending on who you talk to,
Ah.
I would argue that mosquitoes are venomous. They inject a chemical cocktail with which has, in low doses, direct like it sets off or offsets mechanisms in your body and messes with them. So,
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I would consider that I mean, I'm not a venom scientist, so I have no idea, but, I it sounds like it meets the definition,
well, and I'm sure, I
and
mean, if
it's
you took,
painful.
yeah, exactly. If you took a gram of mosquito venom and injected it
Mhm.
into a person, a lot would happen that would not be great for that person.
Yeah.
I don't know if it would be lethal, but it would be certainly not a very comfortable experience.
Absolutely. Is it a not necessarily a wives' tale, but is it not true or is it true that the variability in people's reactions to mosquitoes has a lot more to do with their own like allergy tolerance than the venom in the mosquito itself?
It depends. So there are different mosquitoes will have slightly different effects in people, but a lot of it,
Mhm.
yeah, is your immune system.
Yeah, okay. And same thing kind of with bees, right? Like a bee
Yep.
sting hurts, but a bee sting can kill some people.
Yep, exactly. And that's based on your immune response and whether or not you have an allergic response, for example. Uh, Actually, it's really fascinating. One of the sort of emerging themes that is coming out of Venom research is that our bodies are responsible for far more of the damage and destruction that venoms do than we ever realized. So
Yeah.
even something like a snake venom, one of the really, really gnarly toxic snake venoms that causes, massive tissue death and you end up with these big gaping wounds, right? Some of these
Mhm.
snakes are just known for those kinds of wounds. Well, it turns out a lot of that is our immune system reacting and our immune system essentially like friendly fire attacking. It's attacking its own tissues in response to the venom being there,
Oh,
but not actually successfully in response to the venom. So it's not. So
sure.
what you end up with is if you do things like put in antihistamines or other sort of immune quieting agents, you can actually reduce the damage done by some of these venoms.
Isn't that so funny that these sort of defenses that we have evolved over millions of years can sometimes actually cause more problems because we are, biology's super messy and we don't always apply them in the right cases and we don't always apply them at the right strength because our bodies don't know any better. They just have triggers and they react.
Right, right. And in fact, there is a hypothesis that allergies in general are essentially the byproduct of toxins, and not
Oh,
just
yeah.
venoms, but other poisons and really potent toxins. And there was it initially proposed back in the early 1990s by a sort of enigmatic scientist named Margie Prophet. But it wasn't tested until about 2013. And they found that there is some evidence to support the idea that allergic responses help save your life in the case of life threatening toxins. And they did
Mhm.
this with mice in a really fascinating way because we can alter the genetics of mice basically any way we want to at this point. And so they had regular mice, and then they had mice that lacked IgE antibodies, which is the kind of antibodies that are used that are triggered in an allergic reaction.
Okay.
And they took both of those sets of mice and they injected them with really small amounts of either pit viper venom or bee venom. And all the mice survived. They weren't too happy about it, but they were fine. And then a few weeks later, they injected them with more than lethal doses of the same venoms. So now they're challenged with something that should kill them.
Mhm.
And what was fascinating is that the normal mice that had the allergic pathways intact survived. So that pre-exposure and then exposure again actually somehow protected them against this what should have been a lethal dose of venom. But the ones that
Ah,
lacked the allergic pathway, the ones that couldn't have an allergy attack, died.
and so our own immune response must somehow be implemented, especially in situations that we've heard of. Like, we've all kind of heard these stories, right, of people who are exposed to venom in really, really low doses and sort of develop something of an immunity to it over time.
Right, and so that there's something about the allergic pathway and what we think of as just a bad thing.
Mhm.
Allergies, your immune system going haywire, but there's something about it that it's there at least in theory to do something. And maybe it's something that it doesn't do much of anymore because we're not as exposed to these deadly venomous animals as we once were,
Yeah.
or some of
Yeah.
these poisons and things as we once were. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
but yeah, it's
Is
it's
there
really fascinating.
Is there truth to that idea that in low dose, like, you hear about these, like, snake charmers and people who are, like, maybe farm snakes and things, that they're exposed to, like, super low doses of venom or that they would allow themselves to be bitten, in small areas or whatever in an effort to kind of develop an immunity. Are those stories really hyped and overblown, or is there some truth to that?
I would say there's some truth. So there are many types of toxins that you can essentially train your body
Mhm.
to withstand. Particularly if you keep it up so that you have a high level of circulating antibodies to that toxin at
Mhm.
all times. And there are people that do that with snake venoms. They call themselves self immunizers. And a
Yeah.
really fascinating sort of subculture of largely the venomous reptile community, people that, keep and love venomous reptiles.
Mhm.
Um, and there is some evidence that they are indeed resistant to these venoms. I mean, they
Hmm.
you can go on YouTube and see it. There are people that will get bitten by deadly snakes definitely have a reaction. So we know that there was some sort of venom injected and survive.
Hmm.
Uh, and so there's definitely some truth to it. Now, it's probably less of a science and a more of an art, I guess you might say, than people would think.
Yeah.
And certainly, we know that there are lots of venom toxins in snakes and other species that don't trigger the immune system. So they sort of quietly go in and do things and aren't immunogenic. And that's actually a big problem for antivenom producers because they have these toxins that they're trying to produce antivenoms to help with,
Mm-hmm.
and they can't. Right, so they're having to
Yeah.
try to figure out how to find something to protect against these toxins that don't tend to trigger the immune system. Similarly, they're not going to trigger our immune systems terribly well either. There's also the problem that a lot of toxins work really quickly in really low amounts. And so
Mm-hmm.
you have to have a high level of antibodies in your system to be able to fight against that. You can't just have a few, antibodies. It's not like a vaccine response, right? Because you get a couple of flu molecules in your body, flu viral particles. It takes them a while to get to a concentration to be a problem.
Yeah, that's true.
But
Yeah.
for some of these toxins, 1 to 2 molecules could be a problem. And so you have to have a lot of antibodies already ready to go, sitting there
Mm-hmm.
waiting, which is what an antivenom is essentially. Otherwise, they're going to wreak havoc before your body has the chance to have that immune response.
And also, like you said, it's actually super rare that a venomous animal is going to have just like one type of venom. It's going to be like a cocktail.
All of them, yeah, they're all going to be cocktails. You can have either tens to literally thousands of different compounds in a venom. Some of the cone snails, for example, there's one cone snail they found more than 3,000 different toxins in this one little snail's venom.
Wait a minute, snails are venomous too?
Yep.
What?
Yep. Cone snails are
how,
some of the deadliest venomous animals on the planet, depending on how
how
you
do they
measure
get
things.
you?
So cone snails, they have this modified sort of part in their mouths, or I guess what you'd call their mouths. It, it's sort of like a tongue, at the lack of a better phrasing,
Uh-huh. Oh
and
God, I'm Googling them. They look horrifying.
it's a modified little harpoon. So they shoot this little harpoon and inject through it venom that largely paralytic venoms are the ones you're worried about. So some of the cone snails that hunt fish have venoms that are paralytic enough to cause a lot of problems in people too.
Okay, but like garden snails aren't venomous, right?
No, no, garden
Okay,
snails
good.
are not.
Because I've held those in my hands many, many
No,
times.
it's a set of largely marine snails that you need
Marine
to worry about.
snails.
The
What is
ocean
with
again.
the ocean?
I know,
Ugh.
right?
Oh God. Oh, there's so much lurking in there. I have it's not that I have a fear of water. I quite like visiting the ocean, but I don't often spend time in the water. Mostly because there's so much gross stuff in there. I know a lot of people love it and I don't want to detract anybody from doing it. Hopefully this podcast didn't. But I definitely would much rather sit on the beach and enjoy the waves than actually be in them. Perhaps some of that early trauma of the man of war contributed to that. Oh my gosh, this is fascinating. And there's obviously way more stories and way more interesting coverage in your actual book. I want to make sure I get the subtitle right because we always talk about people's books and we just say the first thing. But it's called Venomous: How Earth's Deadliest Creatures Mastered Biochemistry. So there's a lot of that kind of evolutionary and mechanistic understanding of these venomous structures. Also, I love it. I love it. I love it. And before we go, because can you believe we've been talking for like a whole hour?
I know.
Um, I do want to make sure that I do a quick plug for your other book, which you co-edited along with Jason Goldman, who was just on the show last week, and Bethany Brookshire, who I can't believe I haven't had her on yet. Oh my gosh, that has to change. You guys edited Science Blogging: The Essential Guide. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that was a really fun project for all three of us. I feel confident speaking for the other two for that one, because we've all emerged as science communicators and as writers through blogging. And so we all sort of started out as bloggers. And uh, it was really fun for us to pull together all the people we knew through that blogging community, and all of the great science bloggers out there, or people that have been great science bloggers even if they've moved on from blogging,
Mhm.
and get their insights into how do you start a blog, how do you run a blog, what's the best way to deal with some of the nittier grittier parts of blogging. And so yeah, it was a really incredible fun project. It took us a very long time to put together and actually get out, but we're really really happy with it and proud of it.
Yeah, as you should be. And, I have people ask me all the time when they listen to the podcast or they see other kind of SciComm work that I and my colleagues are involved in. And they're like, how do I get started? What do I do? I really have a lot that I want to say, but I don't know how to pull the trigger. And this is such a great resource that I always tell people about because it really is like a how to guide for blogging for becoming a science communicator in a very do it yourself kind of way, but it's not just for the novice. There's a lot of really good stuff in there, even if you've been doing it for a while and you want to improve your craft and maybe even make some money doing it. Can you believe it?
I
Some
know,
people
right?
actually do that.
How weird. Yeah, I mean, for us, we really wanted to make sure that we had a breadth of different topics. So there is, the sort of beginning sections on how do I set up a blog, but it also has a lot of sort of almost more discussion or thought pieces
Mhm.
for people who have been blogging for a while, of how do you deal with certain things that are bound to come up.
I love it. It's such a great resource to have. So I definitely recommend that you guys check it out in addition to Venomous. Two very different books, but both I think really important to have on any science nerd's shelf, especially one who's interested in spreading the love and communicating science themselves. Well, Christy, before we go, I always close the podcast asking my guests the same two questions. So I am definitely interested in your take because we haven't gotten political or even like, I don't know, we haven't kind of gone this route on the show at all. We've been focusing on one specific topic. So, uh, yeah, so I have no idea what you're going to say, which is always exciting. So the two questions that I ask are, when you think about the future in whatever context, is relevant to you right now as you're thinking, it could be super personal, it could be global or anywhere in between. Number one, what is the thing that really does most concern you, keep you up at night? Sorry. Worry you about the future? And on the flip side of that, what are you most excited and optimistic and enthusiastic for?
Oh goodness. Well,
I know.
that's that's a loaded question. No. Um, so I would say, to answer the second part first. I mean, in this exact moment, the thing that I'm most optimistic and excited about is sort of my this new chapter in my life that I'm about to start, with my little girl who is due in June. And so becoming a parent is is just simultaneously the most terrifying and the most exciting thing that I can think of happening to me. And I'm very, very, very excited to see how that goes, for better or
Yeah.
worse. Um, and I would say that, sort of related to that, I think the thing that most concerns me at the moment, or the thing that keeps me up at night, is just worried about what kind of world and what kind of future is going to be there for this little girl, and what's
Mhm.
going to happen, when she's 10 years old. What will the world look like, and what will especially this country look like, because this is a country that I have been in the past very very proud to be a part of, and really really, um, true blue American sort of feelings. And so I'm worried, what kind of healthcare will be available to her. What will the culture of science look like for her? Will people be interested or respecting science still? Things like that. So, um, obviously related to elections and things like that. But that's what keeps me up at night, is sort of what am I bringing my daughter into?
Yeah, I mean, I think that your sentiments are probably shared amongst many listeners right now who have young children or are wanting to start a family very soon. And yeah, especially in the political climate right now, I can see how that would be incredibly relevant, worrisome, but we don't want to lose hope because we have no idea what the future holds. And of course, today we're recording this. It's not going to air today, so it'll air this coming Monday. But we're recording this on International Women's Day. What a fun way to celebrate women today by talking to a badass female scientist and writer and who's going to be a new mom, teaching us all about Venom. Christie, this was a blast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It really, really was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.